So how long has the bakery been in business?
Well, bakery has been there we're in our 7th year. Yeah. And we're baking more bread than ever before.
Is there any other specialties besides the bread?
Well, tomato gravy is a specialty because people love to eat the tomato gravy on salt rising bread.
But that's really good.
And we do breakfast and lunch all day, and our sandwiches are really good, really delicious.
So why do your customers come to your bakery?
Well, for a number of reasons, but primarily the salt rising bread is one of the main reasons we have the bakery. And we wanted to keep that tradition alive. We want to make it available because people can't get it anywhere else.
Yeah. So in your book you discuss whenever the bread fails. So how often, if any, has that happened in your bakery?
Many times. The bread fails often.
Yeah.
I mean, not often, but kind of regularly now that we've been open so many years. It'll start failing when the weather starts turning cold, it seems like. And so I'm looking forward to Thanksgiving and seeing how we get better and better every year in making salt rising bread, better at the tricks and the nuances and how to recognize when the starter and the sponge are ready. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens this fall.
Yeah. So do you ship the bread to the customers?
Yeah, we ship hundreds of loaves a week all over the United States.
Oh, like where's the farthest away that you've shipped it to?
Well, certainly Alaska, Hawaii, and I'm pretty sure it went to Afghanistan one time, military.
Oh, that's awesome. How far do your customers travel to get to your bakery?
Well, like sometimes 50 miles on the back roads. And they're wanting salt rising bread.
Have any of the people that you visited in the book influenced the way that you make your bread at the bakery?
Oh yeah, we learned a lot from talking with the elderly women and men who made salt rising bread through the years, commercially as well as in their homes.
Tell me about the Salt Rising Bread project.
I started that about, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago because, of course, I was interested in salt rising bread, and because I wanted to collect stories of other people's salt rising bread connection. So I made this website and put all the information that I had at that point about salt rising bread, and then made it so that people could write to me on that website and give me their stories. And so that's been happening for all these years, and it's really been fun, and it's been great to hear their stories and learn from them and all that.
So in the dedication page, you had Pearl as your inspiration, and you had your grandmother, Catherine, as your inspiration. Do you guys want to talk about why they were your inspiration?
Well, I learned how to make salt rising bread from Pearl Haynes, and she lived nearby and made salt rising bread for almost 100 years in the bowl that her great-grandfather made in 1860. And that bowl is still being used for salt rising bread. They never wash it. And now Pearl's grandmother, her granddaughter, and possibly her great-granddaughter will be using it to make salt rising bread.
Well, just that my grandmother made salt rising bread all of her life, as did her mother and her grandmother. So I just grew up eating that bread and loving the bread and loving her, and it's because of her, for me, that the book was written.
So now let's talk about what brought you two together and why you guys made the book.
Well, a mutual friend introduced us, and I first met Jenny at her home, I don't know, 25 or more years ago. And eventually we just got to talking and realized we had the same interest in salt rising bread. And we were both passionate about wanting to learn more about it, so we just sort of evolved doing that together, and then decided that there should be a book about it.
Yeah.
So.
I think that salt rising bread is a mystery as to why it works, when it doesn't, when it does, and it's also challenging. So having something and doing something that has this mystery behind it, as well as that's challenging, is a wonderful thing to get involved in. just in life in general.
So you talk about mysteries. You guys have a list of mysteries in the book.
Why it got its name? Why is it called salt rising bread? Because it's not high in salt.
No. Well, first of all, saleratus is a chemical that occurs naturally on the ground, and when the sun heats it, it comes out of the soil, and it makes it's sort of a white powdery substance like baking soda.
Yeah.
And we know that women use that in the past to bake with. And one day we were talking to Pearl about, ask her, did you ever hear of saleratus? And she said, yes, I remember that, saltaritis. And she pronounced it saltaritis. And we really, like, something clicked in our minds, like, man, maybe there is a connection that's between that, because that's what she called it.
Because saltaritis sounds like salt rising.
So explain what salt rising bread is to somebody who's never heard of it before.
You go, Susan.
We used to say that salt rising bread is a dense, heavy white bread, and it has a kind of a cheese-like flavor, and it makes excellent toast.
I like to say that it's the only bread I know of that's made without yeast. There's no wild yeast from a sourdough or commercial yeast in the bread when it's made correctly.
Yeah. Explain how to generally make it and any special processes behind it.
Yeah, it has the 3 stages. The starter stage, which you ferment overnight, and it has to be certain temperature range, like 104 to 110, something similar to that. And then it ferments and rises up and makes a certain foam that you learn to recognize. And then you make that into the sponge stage, which is the 2nd stage, and that rises for a couple hours. And then you make the 3rd stage, the dough stage.
Which also has to rise in the pans before you can bake it.
So it's very important that it stay consistently around 103 to 110 degrees Fahrenheit. How do you do it here, Susan, at your house?
Well, I was just going to say, for home bakers, it's different, because obviously they don't have that kind of equipment at home. And there are many ways to do that. One is to put your starter on the top of a crock pot that's got some water in it, but not in the crock pot. It's critical not to do that. It gets too hot. Some people have used electric skillets with a little bit of water in it at a low temperature and put their bowl in the water. That will work. I did that for many years. One time I had just a warming tray, I think is what they called it, and it was for putting food on to keep it warm. So it was electric, and I could put my starter on top of that, and it worked really well for years. And then I used it so long it burned out, and then I couldn't use it anymore. But I also have just a small water bath that's more for the home that I use sometimes too.
So describe the smell of the starter.
Well, dirty gym shoes, baby throw up, or the other end, rotten potatoes. I don't know. What do you remember? They've been made.
Yeah, I mean, I've learned to kind of recognize a smell that means to me that it's going to work. And I always smell the starter because that's kind of part of the process. I think it's similar to making cheese. That in the beginning, cheese making probably doesn't smell as good as the finished product. And it's that way with salt rising bread.
So what are complications with the bread?
Well, you're working with wild bacteria, and they're going to be unpredictable. You have to do a fresh starter every time. So maybe one of the bacteria is, the population is slightly different than a previous time. Maybe it's the conditions of what's happening in the house. I mean, you're not working with any kind of microbe that's been perfected and handed down. You start fresh every time.
And you guys talk about different parts of the potato that could potentially not make a starter not work, and what are some other reasons why, and why do you think that parts of the potato won't make it work?
We found that if there's green on the potato, it doesn't work. scientifically, I don't know that we know why
It's a
that is.
chemical
but
that the
it's,
sun is hitting the potato and maybe
yeah.
the bacteria don't like that green.
And some elder bakers say they swear by old potatoes only. Some swear by new potatoes. So, I mean, my experience is that it doesn't.
It doesn't
I mean,
matter.
I've used old and new, and they both work.
Idaho, red.
Yeah, peel them, don't peel them. It all works if if everything else is right.
And why do you think that this tradition suddenly stopped?
One reason is because so many of the women who baked it years ago, and they've died, and so they're not around to carry it on. And another reason is that it is time consuming, and people tend not to have that much time at home these days, or when they do have time at home, they don't want to spend the whole day making bread. I think those are the biggest
I think
reasons.
also it's a skill that you have to have. You have to learn how to recognize when the starter's ready and how to handle it properly, the right temperature. And those are kind of details in bread making that they can't be just written in a book as easily as using commercial yeast, which is very predictable. So it's something that is being lost because it needs to be sort of handed down from a skilled person to an unskilled person. And maybe we're learning a lot of those kind of jobs and daily routines in our lives anyway. It's a little bit difficult to make because of that. So it takes some extra thought, and our modern world doesn't really lend itself to that kind of thinking. So maybe we need to get in touch with those kind of tasks more.
Do you think that your book is kind of the modern day handing it down through word of mouth?
We hope so. We want it to be that.
Yes, it feels good to know that this book is in the world now, and the way to make it, the stories, the history, the science, it's there. So I do believe that will help keep the tradition going, because people have never had a book to read about salt rising bread before.